Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Sauna Talk. And I just want to give you a quick little preview. We'll be visiting here with Mike Nordskog. He's the writer of The Opposite of Cold. Great book. For those into sauna and looking for a holiday gift, this book is available. This is his 10-year anniversary of the publishing of The Opposite of Cold. And I'm pleased to visit with author Mike Nordskog via this podcast. We were close to between sauna rounds, separately but together. He in Southwest Wisconsin at his home, and me up north at my island cabin. And thanks to technology and Zoom and all that jazz, we were there together in spirit for this chat. We talk a lot about where we met. We met at Mikael Olin's Perfect Sweat Summit Symposium in 2014, where a bunch of us sauna enthusiasts gathered at Archimedes Banya in San Francisco, with an invitation from Mikael Olin, authors and journalists and people from all over the world joining together to talk sauna. Pretty great gathering. We talk about the rhythm of sauna, the cycling of rounds, what's misunderstood about sauna, and the book, the publication of the book, some behind-the-scenes stories from Mike and the publication and what it was all about and the motivation for it. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Mike Nordskog, author of The Opposite of Cold. This show is brought to you by Nice Mug. Nice Mug is the only mug made entirely out of ice. For more information, go to nicemug.com and enter the coupon code SAUNA for 10% off your entire purchase. So here we are, another episode of Sauna Talk, and I'm super pleased to introduce to you Mike. He's the author of The Opposite of Cold. And Mike, we're dealing with a bit of a milestone with the book. And before we get into that, I thought I would warm up to our episode of Sauna Talk with something I was just thinking about, and thinking about you. My wife's going back to mainland, back to the city of Minneapolis. I'm on an island on Lake Vermilion, and I have a table saw up here. And I want to send her home with the table saw because I'm going to be with a bunch of stuff. And there I was, my cabin sauna. We built that in 1996, and I'm just now finishing the railings for it. So I needed to rip some boards. And I got to thinking as I came up and hit record here this morning about how with sauna building, it's about the journey, not so much the destination. And the journey's never over. And I'm wondering if you have a thought to that. I thought I'd start Sauna Talk with just a philosophical thought, the sauna building journey.
Yes. Well, you're asking the right guy because, we associate, of course, sauna with Finland. And I associate really great carpentry skills with Finnish friends, too. I mean, a lot of the great carpenters I know. And then there's this term, Finnish carpentry, right? Like to do the details. I am no Finnish carpenter, let me tell you. It's those little details, the window moldings and stuff like that, I never seem to get to, and they can linger. And when I built the sauna that we have down here in Southwest Wisconsin on our farm, I really built it in the sense of make it functional, minimally functional as soon as possible, and expand out from there. So literally, it was one of these buildings where the frame was built, and then I put the skin inside, installed the stove, no insulation or anything, and ran it that way for months while I got my act together to finish up everything else. So I highly believe in that, and it actually can help you figure out along the way things that you may not have otherwise thought of. You have a little more time to sit in the sauna and ponder that little detail. what better place to figure out how to, do the right window molding or something.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And again, staying on the philosophy side of things, as you know, the Finns believe in their heart, and it's true that every sauna has its own soul, and we are creating the soul of a sauna as a friend, as a collaborative partner. And so as we create the physical, we're also creating the spiritual. And so as sitting on the bench there, the spiritual and the physical, I often say, well, I look at these architect plans, and God love architects. I mean, we need them in our world. But when a sauna builder, sends me an architectural plan and they're stewing over the window placement, should it be here? Should it be here? I come right back to your point and I say, well, let's get it done and get your sauna done and go sit on the sauna bench and then go figure out your windows and get out your skill saw and cut them out and then frame out for your windows. I mean, it gets about like that, because what you're creating then is something that completely relates to your personality and also the landscape. Sauna is about nature, right, Mike?
It is. It's about those elements, stone and fire and water and wood, and being in close contact with them. And
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's wind the clock back. I think the main, the main thing you're known for within this community of sauna is this wonderful book, The Opposite of Cold. And I thought it would be fair for listeners if we could just wind the clock back to the origin of the idea, and maybe the beginning of the framework of the book, and maybe if you could date stamp and time stamp us, we'd love to hear that.
Sure. Yeah, glad to. And it's, as you mentioned at the outset, it's kind of a waypoint here in that whole journey. And it was 10 years ago in September, I think it was September 14th, I looked it up the other day, 2010, when the book was published by the University of Minnesota Press. And that was a really a great moment for me. For those who haven't seen the book before, the backdrop behind me is a sauna up in northeastern Minnesota, at my family's cabin place that my brothers and dad and I had rehabbed back in the 1990s. And through that process, learned a lot about the building, had used it all my life in lots of ways, particularly in the kind of the kids, warming house for swimming aspect of sauna, which is an amazing part of the tradition for sure. And then growing up and coming back into it from, having lived in other parts of the country, this building really just had a lot of meaning to me. So I'd written about sauna in a couple different venues, a couple of magazine pieces, and I worked with a photographer on one of those, Aaron Hautala, out of the Brainerd area, and he had come up and shot our sauna, and it was just like transforming for me to see through the eyes of someone with such vision as Aaron has. He's just a master of many media, and he's from the Iron Range and really enthusiastic about sauna, and it was a really fun collaboration. So we thought, let's do a book about this. Essentially we envisioned a coffee table book with a lot of text in it, and that's basically what our editor Todd Oriola at the University of Minnesota Press agreed with, and that's it in the long run. So it's a book that you can see a lot of beautiful details of historic or remnant saunas throughout the upper Midwest, kind of in the Finnish American sauna belt. The watershed of Lake Superior is a big part of all of that, But anyway, that's the book, and it came out, like I said, in September of 2010. And I got my, the first copy in the mail that day and pulled it out, and it's a beautiful volume. It's still the first printing is almost out, actually. And I'm pretty confident there will be a paperback edition after that, but beautifully printed in Italy with a linen cover and a beautiful dust cover. And to me, the proudest moment of all that actually was flipping over on the back and seeing the blurb they'd chosen. And they'd asked me about a few people who could do this. And I immediately thought of Mikkel Oland, who had written Sweat, which was such an important book for me. So there was a really kind blurb from him on the back of it. And it was, great to be there. And the next few months, we did so many events and so much television and radio, because it was really there was really an appetite for this. And, our interactions in the years subsequent to that, it's just like, it was kind of a fortunately timed book, because I think there's such a resurgence in interest in sweat bathing in the country and in the world right now, along with, I think you make this point often, like locally crafted beers and these sort of things. People really appreciate things that are local and authentic. And for those of us, particularly in the northeastern part of Minnesota, Minnesota in general, the upper Midwest in general, this is something that's really part of the cultural heritage here strongly. So I'm very proud of that. And the book I'm really happy with the way it came out. And I had nothing to do, by the way, with my own sauna being on the cover. That was kind of an editorial decision that came through in the long run. And so, no, it's not this snowy in Brimson right now. Although I did see, by the way, a friend in the UP posted some snow just yesterday. So anyway, we're on the verge of prime sauna season right now.
I couldn't agree. I mean, there's something about fall sauna. My friend Tom, who has a sauna that I built right on the shores of Lake Superior, just south of Two Harbors. Anyway, Tom's line is the fall sauna is like the return of an old friend. There are these forgotten feelings in a way. I mean, you've gone through, this nice long days of summer and warm lake water and all that, and then you get that snap, much like biting into a crisp fall apple. The idea of firing up the sauna when that heat is almost needed as much as welcomed. That's our heritage.
Right.
That's our climate. And
right
on. Yeah.
To get that sort of heat that lets you sit outside in the 42-degree evening and feel, well, this is just where I need to be, just in the right place.
It is beautiful. How did you and Aaron go about, was it you and Aaron, or how did you guys go about choosing where you brought yourselves through this journey of cataloging and visually, as well as your writing? How did you go about your journey to find saunas and stuff like that? Was it was there like an outline involved in a map that you took out, or did you take that organically?
I did a lot of research. I mean, we talk about it as a coffee table book, but I'm a big fan of natural history and biography, and I have a lot of research background, and so I spent a lot of time in the existing literature and really digging deep to find topics and work the beat, talk to people who are particularly in Finnish American cultural institutions, and find out, looking for the elusive savu sauna of whatever particular community that's still in existence. And there's of course a lot of information out there if you start digging. So we found quite an array of beautiful topics, and then so planned a lot of travel around that, particularly around the upper Midwest. But we did also spend 2 weeks in Finland the summer before the book came out. So that was pretty exhaustive. And then some of it is simply as both Aaron and I mean, here we are, my sauna in the background ends up on the cover because we're on this lake in the Brimson area, where there's a whole shore along this bay of Finnish American families from South Avenue in Two Harbors, which was, down near Agate Bay and Two Harbors. If you're familiar there, there's this Finnish American community there. It's where a lot of the Finns in town lived anyway. And these folks all had properties up here near each other on the lake, and all of them had saunas, and they developed these properties in the 1930s. So you've got all these wonderful examples of vernacular architecture here, designed by the people who are going to use them, with these beautiful old sauna stoves back in a time where you built them on the edge of the lake, truly, like you step out the door and we're pretty much walking into the lake. And so that was just a treasure trove, And in fact, in the course of things, one of the folks that did an introduction to the book was Professor Arnie Allonen from University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's an expert in Finnish American, culture and effects on the landscape, and he's a noted scholar of in this area. And he ended up actually coming up here and looking at all these buildings because we talked about it. He really wanted to see them, measure them, and made some great assessments about the one we have too, things I hadn't thought about before.
Mm.
So that's how we chose them. And they range from, quite a few in northeastern Minnesota for sure, out to the Finnish Triangle, way out in, in west central Minnesota, where there was a large Finnish community, up to Thunder Bay, of course, all over the UP, and in Madison, and in Marquette and Houghton Hancock, and northern Wisconsin, a few places there. Cokato, Minnesota, west of the Twin Cities, where, we found what is, I think, roundly agreed to be the oldest continuously existent Finnish sauna in North America that we could find of, dating back to the 1860s. Although the tradition goes back even farther to, what is now the Philadelphia area was a settlement of the Swedish Empire once upon a time, and they had a lot of Finns in their their group there that settled. So it goes back there. But anyway, we didn't photograph anything left behind in Philadelphia.
Right. And for listeners, this is so obvious, but I just have to sound very obvious about what Mike's talking about is, the Finnish immigrants that came to America, quite obviously settled, or evidently were settling in areas that reminded them of home. And the north of Minnesota is a perfect example of that, where the whole region is dotted with lakes. I mean, Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes. So there are these pockets that you visited, these pockets of Finnish immigrants, because they brought sauna with them. And much like in Finland, if you're, going to build a cabin or a lake home or whatever, the sauna is always built first. And in that tradition came to America. I mean, they brought with them sauna in their DNA. These Finns have been taking sauna for centuries. So you probably saw that, Mike, right? You saw older saunas in newer cabins, maybe, huh?
Right. And one thing I like to point out, by the way, is that, the Finns moved to this area largely because there were, mining and logging jobs at the time. Obviously loved this place because it was so similar to home, with the evergreen forests and the bedrock, lakes and a lot of that, and a pronounced winter. But it's even colder here. Is one thing I love to point out is that, you go into the heart of Finland, it's very cold. They have very cold winters up there for sure. But they're on the western part of Europe, and we're in the smack in the middle of the continent here, so we get even colder.
Yeah,
so there's even perhaps more reason. And actually, I do remember reading a study that found that in a certain part of, I think it was southwest St. Louis County, like down by Toivola or in that area or something like that. But it was a study by Matty Kaups, who was a scholar at UMD for a long time, who studied Finnish American impact on culture, and found that there were more saunas per mile in these agricultural areas in these parts of Minnesota than there were in the same areas in Finland. So it was even more pronounced use of sauna, believe it or not. So, and those were the kind of fascinating things as a writer to find out.
Amazing. And what part was that? More saunas per mile? Where was that?
To my recollection, well, it's in the book, but which don't think I've read since it came out. Yeah, once in a while, look through it and read it in snippets. But I'm one of those people who just likes to look at these beautiful pictures as well. So, but anyway, I think it was Toivola or Cotton or somewhere in southwest, or maybe over in Carlton County around Cloquet. Anyway, Esco, that area.
Yep. I go past that all the time. So seeing all these saunas, these authentic saunas, you and I use the term quite appropriately. How would you define what does authentic sauna mean to you, Mike?
Yeah, I think a key thing, a term I hear a lot, and let me preface this by saying, I respect anybody's attempts to do sweat bathing or embrace heat in whatever way, and I don't mean to disparage any other take on that. But one term I hear a lot is dry sauna, and I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me. That's an oxymoron to me. The idea that you don't have water that you're throwing around inside this room onto rocks, I often start up my first round. That's kind of become part of my discipline with it is over the years is doing the first round, having a hot enough room and doing it and breaking a sweat without throwing water on the rocks first, But by the time you're done, I mean, there's a lot of water being thrown to the point that usually I kind of pace it to the point where we're kind of cooling the rocks down at the end in that fifth round or something like that, you know.
Yep.
So water has to be a part of it, and not just throwing water on the rocks, but ideally having a room set up where you really can bathe in there. And I use the one we have here that way, you know, pretty much on a weekly basis. And so it's, you know, you're not just in there sweating after you've had a shower or something. I mean, it's like I've got the washcloth and everything in dumping buckets. And we've got one of the wood-fired stoves that has a tank attached to the side to heat up hot water. And that's just such, you know, it's just the whole part of it, because you really are, it's bathing in a different way that showering or even being in the bathtub is, because, you know, you really, I mean, not to be too graphic here, but you could be sheeting off skin is what, you know, you really do. And that's part of the benefit of it in the long run.
Yeah. How about the mechanics of, again, back to what is authentic sauna to you as someone who's a scholar, I would say, and you've seen so many of these, you know, for many, and it's a leading question, because for those, there are many listening who are new to sauna, and they're in climates and cultures where, you know, sauna is a relatively new thing. We talk about the history within Finland and within the upper Midwest and stuff. How else would you define authentic sauna besides the prevalence of water and the ability to bathe in the hot room?
Well, another element that certainly is not absolutely necessary, but to me, I'm sure 95% of the saunas I've ever had, probably more, are wood fired. I just love a wood fired sauna. And, you know, the smell of the wood smoke, the really potent heat that you get from that, the greater care it takes, kind of the pre-planning, not just starting the fire, you know, an hour and a half or two before you do it, but preparing wood and having wood ready, it makes it much more, you know, it immerses you a lot more in the natural elements of things. And I know that can sound a little whatever romantic, but to me, that's it, to do it as, you know, to have sort of ritual aspects to it that take a lot of time. That's what makes it more beneficial in the long run. Mm-hmm. But that said, you know, obviously there are so many places where a sauna is demanded, and having a wood-fired sauna is just not practical. And of course, electric-driven saunas can drive an enormously pleasurable sauna experience, no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. And actually, recently, I just had a great conversation last weekend with a friend out in Montana. They have a weekend place up in the mountains, and it's built, the frame of it, it's really a beautiful building. It's built from like a grain bin type silo is the framework of it. So it's a cylinder on end, and they want to have a sauna there. And they're really drawn to the barrel sauna design. And, you know, and I can be sort of a purist and think, well, you know, maybe you should figure out exactly what you want for your place. But I look at those time and again, and I'd love to have one actually at home with a good electric stove in it, to have that alternative in a way, because they're just so, it seems so natural. And of course, in this context where you have one cylinder standing on end, and then to have this other cylinder standing on its side next to it, you know, kind of like, just in terms of the design of the site, it seemed like that's inevitable there. And I'm sure they can deliver great heat. I don't think I've actually ever been in a barrel sauna itself, but I've been in you know, pre-made. I love this idea of you know, the trailer saunas I see, and doing something that's just sort of more ready-made for people, because there are certain design principles, as you know, that are really fundamental to just a common sense things. Like, you know, like when you have a building, if you've got 2 tiers of benches and your average sized people, you don't have a 7-foot beanpole in your family or something, make sure that when you're sitting on the top bench, you design your top bench so that your head is up close to the ceiling.
Yeah.
You see so many, and, you know, often like maybe with a peak ceiling inside, where, you know, you're leaving a lot of heat on the table up there, and why not have your head up in there? Because, you know, because as any really enthusiast out there knows, at first that those first couple blasts feel really maybe quite intolerable up there. But if you're alternating with cold plunge, by the time you're in on a third cycle or fourth cycle, you are really, you're an equal to whatever the outside or inside is throwing at you. And that's just feels great. So
beautiful. Yeah. So well said. Yeah. And I can relate to so many of those points that you're making. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't riff with you about this. I'll come at it this way is, on my recent trip to Finland, one of the things that I was reminded of is the egalitarian nature of good sauna, meaning, the heat is so familiar. And, I kind of hit this stride of familiarity with really good heat. And, to define what that means, you touched upon is, this sense of good design. And, I learned from a Finn about, your upper bench, you want to have about 2 fists above your head from the ceiling. And, these little principles, and let alone like the quality of the lolu, the steam and the heat being produced from the sauna stoves and stuff. It's like I could close my eyes and be right back to my island cabin. So,
yeah.
And now I have to sound like a sauna snob because, Mike, I get invited to, in the time of Corona, the invitations aren't around and nor would I take them up. But when people invite me to sauna, I have to kind of do a check and say, well, what kind of sauna am I being invited to? Because I'm not so abashed to tell you that if it's not the kind of sauna that I love so much, I have 2 of my own, and I can groove on really good heat within my own space. So I'm becoming a bit of a snob about that, for better or for worse. Can you relate?
Well, I can, and it's and I have 2 saunas I get to use regularly too. The one we have on the farm here, and then the one up at the cabin in northeastern Minnesota. And our eldest child, my son, who's 18 now, he's really he's an outdoors guy, and he loves sauna. And he and I will sit in there and we're like, which one of these is better? And of course the one behind me is unbeatable. And I really want to have you on that bench at some point, just to see. I've often bragged without a whole lot of reason to brag that this is the best sauna in St. Louis County, Minnesota. Anyway, but that's a pretty big reach. But yeah, and the other part is, I think sauna is it's a pretty intimate thing. So often if we'll have people over to do it, it might be depending on who the friends are. You guys should go over and use it for a couple rounds, and of course, in this day and age with COVID, that is certainly the practice. It's, even though it's a really hot space, it's still, it's a very intimate space, and you're in close with people. So, sharing it up that way. And yeah, of course I've been in other great saunas too. And that kind of surprised me, but yeah, I really do like it very, very hot. And, although I should say, and to me that means kind of 190 Fahrenheit and up as a starting point, but sometimes 160 is more than enough.
I agree. So, yeah, and I can totally relate to that. I was taught by an old Finn up here on Lake Vermilion, who prescribes to much the same routine as you, is start your first round dry, and I do the same. I love that because you only get one chance at that temperament, that what do you call it? That climate, or there's a better word for it. But you only get one shot at that in a sauna session. And so I kind of relish that first round being mostly dry, and then building the core body temp, and then that first blast of steam. It's almost like you've worked for it.
Well, and part of that is being aware that you're sweating, which, the sweating part of it. And again, I haven't said this yet, but this is a point I always make, is that I don't understand, medicine very well, or human, physiology or anything like that. But I do understand that sweating and, that part of it it's just seems to be a really therapeutic thing, because your body is going through this discharge that's in reaction to a stressor that is very similar to things like running and other maybe more aerobic exertions. And so that part of things is important, and it makes you aware that it's happening before you have that constant condensation of steam on you, where you are bathing in steam. Actually, ultimately, that's making you wet. That just the heavy humidity coming off of those stones. Hey, one more parameter I wanted to throw in there, and I know you're familiar with this one because we learned it out at I think we were in the same conversation at out in San Francisco at the Perfect Sweat Summit. Which, by the way, I proudly wore my shirt today. Have you noticed that detail?
Beautiful job. Hey, I got to interrupt because I know you're not going to forget your point, and I love that you're doing that. But the Perfect Sweat Summit that Mike is referring to is Mikael Allen's gathering of, he did just this incredible job, way ahead of his time. Do you remember what year that was, Mike?
2014. Actually, I noticed it's on the shirt.
Mm-hmm.
I can you can verify here. Can I get in close enough?
And why don't you tell listeners what was the Perfect Sweat Summit in San Francisco?
So Mikael has he'd written Sweat back in the 1970s, and has not just looking at the Finnish tradition, but sweat traditions around the world. So the Native American traditions, East Asian traditions, Central American traditions, the Turkish tradition. There's just so many of them, and so he at some point in the early part of this last decade started talking to folks about doing a television production, and that's a great thing about where media is now. It's just there's so many maybe more previously marginalized ideas that can find an audience in places like Netflix or things like that that make it worthwhile because the enthusiasts can find them out. But anyway, so as I understood it afterwards, I got a letter from Mikael asking if I'd like to come out to be a part of that. So it was a symposium at Archimedes Banya, which was then a pretty much brand new facility down on the South Bay, I think around where Candlestick Park used to be, down in that part of the city. And beautiful publicly available facility for sauna and an amazing cold plunge. They're really quite a place. And so a lot of us were invited out there. People like Glenn Auerbach, who with Sauna Times, was at the time blogging quite a bit and really trying to create a repository for a lot of the DIY, the how-to stuff. People involved, like from the Finnish Sauna Society, and authors and journalists and activists like John Peterson from the Twin Cities, who is a real force in community sauna type stuff. So we were all invited out there, and then it was obvious that at that point that we were out there, they were doing also some kind of talking head filming for the production in the long run. So so they had a film crew there as well. And a lot of events. We got to watch the film Steam of Life from Finland.
Yep. And the co-producer was with us and was able to talk through the production of that film, which was a real treat. Yes,
really a great gathering. And in San Francisco, we had a couple of great dinners. And it really, to me, that was kind of the culmination of this whole book project for me, was to be able to attend something like that and have something to contribute to it. Because one thing, the point I really wanted to make there is that, we're talking about a resurgence or a rediscovery, but in places like northern Minnesota, it was never lost. I mean, it's there, it's enduring, and it's not going anywhere, because it's not just a Finnish American thing. It's a human thing. People are, they crave this, and they find it, and they have access to a place in northern Minnesota where the lakes are never too terrible. I mean, it can get pretty warm in August, but much of the year they're pretty chilly. So that was that place, and I'm going to loop us back here to where I was starting. But one of the conversations was with I believe it was someone from the Finnish Sauna Society who said, "Well, do you guys know what the rule of Loyoli is?" Lulu, and he described it in terms of designing the hot box space. And so we were talking earlier, you and I, about how close to the ceiling you are, but also having your feet at the level of the stones, so that your entire body is kind of up above that heat producing, that oven there, that source, that hearth that's doing that.
Yeah.
And that and that's something I incorporated. I was just starting on choosing the site of our place here, so I made sure that the building had enough verticality in it to make that happen. And that could be hard to pull off with a situation that you're going into, and depending on the stove and everything, you got to pull all that off. It could be a little difficult, but it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, let's geek out on that, because I've wrestled the law of Lolu, to the ground a couple of different times. Being a big fan of the Kuma stove, it's a little more, should we say, vertical. I mean, it's a taller heater, as you know. And then I love that term you use about up toward the ceiling. You want your benches up there, so otherwise you're leaving a lot of heat on the table. Beautifully said, by the way. So I've danced with these constraints to the half inch in my sauna builds, and I'm almost there. I can almost get there, but one of the offsets of having your feet at the level of the sauna rocks while you're sitting on the upper benches, you're kind of creating like back to the high school football games where you got to climb up the seats. And as you know, I mean, we've talked about this 4 and 5 cycles or sauna rounds. That's a lot of climbing up and down. And then it's dark and it's night and it's wet. And you got people, doing that. And that's the best way I can describe it, is like, high school gymnasium benches. So I want to be super sensitive to that constraint as well. So anyway, I've been really grappling with the law of Lolu and good sauna construction. And I don't know, I find I come up a couple inches short. So I'm going to get scolded by all the Finns for lack of effort.
Well, again, you look, like I look at the barrel sauna design, which is a total that cannot conform to this restraint we're talking about, and yet it looks like it just must, and again, I've been inside of one, like peeking in one or something, but I haven't had a proper sauna in one, and I'd imagine they can deliver the heat quite well with that curved ceiling. So.
Well, they do and they don't. I mean, I've taken a fair number of saunas in a barrel sauna, and I want to be diplomatic because I know many listeners are going to have a barrel sauna, and I think you said it very well on the outset. That you have a sauna, and that's a great step in the right direction.
Very true.
But the thing is like in northern Minnesota and our climate is we have to work for our heat, and as you're out there and it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever, and you're experiencing sauna, I just can't get there in a barrel. And what's the worst, and this gets back to the law of Lolu. I mean, the absolute worst thing is that the upper half, from your belly button up, you're just friggin' hot, and from your belly button down, you're not. And then even worse than that is your feet. You almost need to wear shoes in the hot room. So
I can see that, because you are sitting at ground level for sure.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I would love to talk about is floors and the lower part of a sauna. And I was on there's a Facebook site dedicated to some DIY stuff, and I'd seen a lot of questions in there. People discovering this idea. Do you need an airtight floor in a sauna? Mm-hmm. And I think there's some people who've always done it that way, to have a concrete draining floor. Is that a necessity to have a proper sauna? And I can tell you straight out that it's not remotely a necessity, because the building that I built down here is on skids. Mm-hmm. and that was a kind of a cost saving move. But also, one thing about that is you've got a mobile sauna, and where in a lakeside situation, you could ostensibly have it closer to the lake than you otherwise could, because it's not falling under the or in an urban backyard situation, it's not a fixed building, and so it's not subject to the same restraints necessarily. I mean, that varies by locality, but anyway, so mine is on skids, and I've got a gap floor there that I screened underneath, and I put some patio block under the stove that is elevated above that level. And that whole thing, I calculated it once. I mean, I think it, maybe is about this much of space on the bottom. But with a wood burning stove, it makes the floor is definitely a cool space in the sauna, but it does not affect at all what's happening on the second level, from the first bench and up, without a doubt. And then the water drains out easily everywhere. And it's fortunately in this case some old redwood that was at a pool deck that had been on our property, and I just recycled that in there, and it's really good bomb-proof wood, and I love it. And there's the only time where you might have a little effect is if it's 0 degrees and blowing 25 miles an hour. You're probably going to feel a little infiltration there. But if you have a essentially tight building up top, with a vented with ventilation up top that's controllable, then it's still in there, and the wood stove is consuming so much of it's part of that positive regeneration of air that you need in a sauna for sure. So that's one thing I wanted to touch on there, is that you don't need a fixed building with a concrete mass, which in its own way can be a heat sink to some degree. If that's, you're coming into that building in Ely and it's, a 5-degree floor in there, that's going to impede your heating up the building to some degree.
So well said. There's so many things to unpack with what you're saying there. So we could talk about your floor as almost being like a deck. I mean, you can see
it's a deck. It's
a deck, right? And the beauty of that is this infinite air, the infinite oxygen coming in to not just feed the combustion of your wood-fired sauna stove, but the idea of circulation and proper ventilation controlled, by a vent up high. So you're getting this fresh air. And, on a quick riff on that is, some people say, oh, I don't like sauna. I get really tired. Well, there is a theory that I actually believe, quite strongly, is a lot of fatigue from sauna comes from lack of oxygen. And, you could go into a closet in a bedroom and close the door and sit for 15 minutes and you're going to come out with that same feeling of fatigue. So yeah, ventilation is super critical. And I love the point that you're making about this heat sink from a slab, right? So yeah, those that are looking to build a sauna, decking, the wood is such a better medium for that. Now, and the one other point I will make is I call it, say, the triple bench, in a way, where if you're building a sauna and you have this open deck, you want to be above that. I find that if you're sitting on what's called the middle bench and then your feet are elevated 4-6 inches off of that deck, the air will come up. I call it a gentle blow dryer, where it runs along the bottom of your hot room to feed the stove. And that is a really functional thing too, because your sauna will dry out much quicker. And I don't know, maybe have you experienced that, like especially in winter where you're not getting ice build up in your hot room?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't experienced any buildup at all. And one thing to keep in mind is that even if you're bathing in a sauna, I mean, I have a family of 5. My wife and I have 3 kids, and this sauna behind me on the lake there, I've been there in the winter, and we've had a Saturday night bath up there where you got 3 kids bathing and everything. And we do that with about 6 gallons of water. It doesn't take much water really. And then you're outside in the snow or, into the lake if you're hardy enough. But I have found no problem with that because the room is so overheated, and I don't mean overheated in the sense of you can't bear it, which is part of it all. But this is, buildings don't get up to 150 degrees, let alone 190. And there's so much residual heat in there that's always going to chase things out. If you had a sauna, I guess if you're at a campground or something and it's running 12, 15 hours a day with a lot of people and throwing a lot of water, you might have some mildew and moisture issues. But I find it always dries out really well. And with that in mind too, I think, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the ideas of insulation or anything, but I think a lot of people get hung up on the idea of insulation as we understand it with respect to a home that's going to be heated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through a cold season where you can have all of that cold buildup on the outside. The sauna building, my sauna, if it's 0 degrees and you have a 190 degree sauna, that building's going to be 0 degrees the whole thing is going to be 0 degrees 24 hours from now. And you don't have any of that that frontier of where there's that deep contrast between environments where there's any condensation problem or anything. So the building is so hot while you're using it, there's a lot of residual heat to chase all that out. And I don't think you have to worry about it much, and you don't need a lot of insulation. But as I was telling you, I started out by building ours. I did the paneling on the inside before I sided the building, and then I insulated within the stud pockets with the reflective stuff facing in, and did a little bit of sealing around that and everything. But it's tongue and groove cedar on the inside, and there's a little bit of ventilation through that and everything. But of course, that's just all part of the building breathing, and a half. Well, I don't know if I used an inch. I probably used 1 inch. The foam board, and that's just always been more than enough. Because of course, the other thing is we're using this for one sauna for a couple hours, and I don't care if it's it doesn't need to retain heat 6 hours in the future.
Good points.
Now, on the other hand, one of the things I really love about this building behind me here is it's northern white cedar, 6-inch log building with the dovetail corners and everything. It's a beautiful handcrafted building, and with a concrete foundation and a drain in it and a really big wood stove. It gets super hot in there. And on a winter morning, you're up there for Christmas, and you get up the next morning and you go down, it's still 80 degrees in there, 80 or 90 degrees in the morning. And, you could, if you weren't the sauna participant, you could maybe go down there and there'd be some leftover hot water, and you could have a little bath and shave in that room,
Beautiful. Yeah. The heat stays. And, there's a difference between, 80 degrees isn't 80 degrees. If you have 80 degrees in a room with like baseboard electric, it is fundamentally different than 80 degrees in this sauna building that you're speaking about, where everything is 80 degrees and has been a lot warmer. I don't know, there's this resonating heat. And the way I describe it, maybe you can relate, is like, let's just say it's a January winter day and you're driving up to Brimson and it's like -5 Fahrenheit or something like that. I mean, I don't know about you, but like I could have that heater in the car cranked the whole way and my feet are cold the whole trip, whereas in a radiant heat house, it could be set at 65 and my feet are toasty warm.
Yeah.
So heat is not heat.
Heat is not heat. Well, and one other example of that is, you tell someone who is maybe not that familiar with sauna that, and they'll ask, well, how hot of a sauna have you been in? I mean, what's the upper range of comfortable? And I would say, for me, the upper range of comfortable in the particular saunas that, well, it actually is different between the two of them. So the one here on the farm, I'd say 210 is really, really hot in that room. And it's a smaller room. It's a different stove with lower rock capacity. But anyway, that it just delivers the heat pretty quickly there. The one at the cabin, 230 degrees, is not intolerable.
Yeah.
And I've had that room as hot accidentally once by burning wood that I wasn't familiar. It was mulberry from my yard in the Twin Cities at the time. And it burned a lot hotter than I experienced. It's a 260 degree sauna in there, really hot. Anyway, this range of figures, I know that sounds pretty astounding. To some people, that's terribly hot. And they can't imagine how you can even endure a 210, 212 degree boiling point of water. How can you endure that? Of course, when you're going in, it's 210 and 212. It's at that dry heat level. You're just inside an oven there. And I always like to invite people to the comparison of, take a head of broccoli and try to cook it in an oven at 210 degrees, and it's going to take a long time. Put it in a steamer at 212 degrees, and it cooks in 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. So you're getting, of course, that's the whole rhythm point of sauna is to get the broccoli cooking steam in between, then the omnipresent underlying oven heat.
Yes.
Did I lose you there? No, that's
not at all. Not at all. I'm totally with you. The rhythm of sauna, you said that so beautifully, where we are in control of that balance between temperature and humidity. and we can build that. And then as we go down and jump in the lake and stuff, it almost like the sauna, a good sauna will reset itself. You come back in and, maybe if you have the hygrometer thing going, it's back down almost to neutral. It's maybe a little more humid than the first sauna round, but you can kind of rebalance at that. And I think you referenced it in our sauna cycles are quite similar, Mike, in that, as the rounds go on, humidity may go up, may be going up through each cycle. But what a beautiful thing to balance that, the cooking of the broccoli. Love it.
Yeah. Well, and of course, that's why the untreated, wood walls are such an important thing, because they're really absorbing some of that humidity as you go along. And it does become much more responsive there several rounds in. So I've got a question for you, Glenn, because I know I love your passion for sauna, and I've heard your story before about being in Sweden. I think you were like hitchhiking in cold and wet or something like that at the end of the day, and you got a really good sauna at the end of the day, and it sort of made you a convert forever, because you're not one of those people northeastern Minnesota who grew up. You weren't born in a sauna, right?
Correct.
But cold plunge, the cold side of things. I wrote this book called The Opposite of Cold, and my point in framing it that way was that this building is something that allows you to counteract the real harshness of winter, right? But what I first realized at the Perfect Sweat Summit in San Francisco in 2014, we were talking about, is how the counterpoint of cold is so vital as well. And they had this refrigerated water. There was the bath. There was, I think that was at, I don't know, it was maybe 45 or 42 degrees. I'm not sure, but anyway, cold water.
How California of them too, to refrigerate water.
So anyway, this is a question I'm asking you. Finally, let me get to it. But had you made that connection before, and how important is the cold plunge part of it to you?
Thank you. I love the
question. To the experience.
I love the question, and from my experiences living in the Nordic region, Finland and Sweden, as a young impressionable college kid, what I learned very quickly. You got to figure, my sauna life began at age 18, and it began with a big wallop. Like it hit me over the head like a 2x4, and I haven't gone back since. So my point though is that in the motherland of the Nordic region of Europe and stuff, cold is part of sauna, just like the stove, just like the rocks, just like the sauna bench. It is an integral part. There is no sauna at all in the Nordic regions of Europe that doesn't involve the cool down in the cold. Even apartment saunas and stuff, they're in Finland and what have you. They're built, like as a compromise, sure, because you're not out in nature, but you have a little electrically heated sauna in an apartment, and adjacent to that is a shower. And everybody uses the cold. It's an integral part. And to your point about the history of our region in the upper Midwest, these saunas were built dotting along the shores of cold glacial lakes. So it's integral. It's interwoven into the fabric of what is sauna. It's implied. It's just done, and it's known. And so on one more point on that is it's quite interesting with this call it this resurgence or this new wave of interest in sauna, how this is not often known, or it has to be learned in a way. Like, people think a sauna is just the hot box, and they go and they sit in there for 20 minutes, and then they go take a lukewarm shower and put their gym clothes in their bag, and off they go. So call it an education process, but without the heat, there is no cold, and without the cold, there is no heat.
And without both of them, there's no equilibrium, and that, I think I heard when you were talking to Mikkel a couple of weeks ago, you guys using that term, and it's something that I think about a lot when you go from the really hot to, in my case, our sauna down here, at the farm is next to a spring creek that runs at about 48 degrees. And then even better, I have, it's a single plane roof that has a gutter. And so I catch all the rain off of that roof and have one of those big poly stock tanks, 150 gallon version, by the way. I highly recommend 150 over the 100, but although the 100 is great too. So for the cold plunge, and that's where you really get some eye openers, because now we're getting into the season where you have very cold nights. So if it rains when it's 34 degrees out, that water is very likely, it might be a little bit warmer than that coming down, but from high elevations, but you can be taking a bath. I don't mean to put it that way. It evokes somehow, bubbles and candles and everything.
And a brush.
A plunge. You can have your plunge into 34 degree water, which is just electrifying. And what you find out, and it's hard to convert people to this a little bit, because everyone's afraid of it. Mm-hmm. Instinctively. Of course you are, because, everyone knows that hypothermia can set in quite quickly, and shivering in an uncontrolled environment, no doubt about it. And people with heart conditions or other, medical conditions have to deal with this quite cautiously, for sure. But you go through that and you come out, and then it's just like temperature doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well,
after a couple of rounds of that.
Yeah, that moment of equilibrium where, oh, there's so much on that. But, when you're sitting on the sauna bench, and then, when you have this ice cold lake that's welcoming you, you can stay, you're encouraged to stay in the hot room just that extra time longer, right? And then conversely, when you jump off the dock and you're in this cold lake, or in your 150 gallon stock tank in your backyard kind of a thing, to know that you have a sauna with the stove whispering in your ear, a few feet away, welcoming you back for another session, you stay in that cold that much longer. And, the rubber band theory of sauna is really accentuated when you have these temperature extremes. And I call it the heat and the cold, like 1 + 1 = 3. Yeah,
that works for me.
Right on, brother. I appreciate your time. But you have such. I wanted to read some quotes from your book, but we're going to save unless you want to speak to something in your book. I'm going to put you on the spot in a way, as you think about the opposite of cold and revisit, some of your writing within that book. I want you to just visit, just a quick visit with us. Tell us either a little anecdote or a story that really resonates for you from your work 10 years ago, celebrating the 10-year anniversary of your book, The Opposite of Cold.
There's a lot of good memories from that, because we traveled a lot and found some really remote places and saunas that I had to see and evoke something. And I think for me, probably the most adventurous thing we did was we chartered a fishing boat out of Thunder Bay, like to go troll for lake trout type of operation, with a guy named Archie. I can't remember his last name, and hopefully Archie's still working up there in Thunder Bay. But so this is, and of course, Thunder Bay is a very, very Finnish Canadian city. I think maybe has had traditionally the highest level of Finnish immigration of any city in North America. Mm. And there's still, when we were up there, Kangas Sauna, which was a really great example of a public sauna operation, But anyway, so off in the offshore islands out there towards Isle Royal, it's really an archipelago out there. There's so many islands. And there's one island that is on Crown lands, on their public lands up there, but that weekend boaters had built a sauna out of washed up spruce logs from the old pulp rafts. They used to float across Lake Superior, and once in a while those would break loose, and you'd have beaches in certain parts of the lake that would be like toothpicks everywhere with these logs. And so they had put one together there once upon a time, and it's a nice little harbor, and people the weekend, sailing or out there trolling for trout or anything, would go out to would have this little refuge there, so it was a place people could camp, but they had built a sauna there. And so I really wanted to see that. So we chartered this boat, and Aaron and I, and actually my son Cole, who was, I don't know, he would have been about 7 years or 8 years old then. He came along with us, and we got up at 4:30 in the morning and got on this charter and went out there and photographed that site and explored it. And there were a couple of weekenders out there who explained the history to us in this beautiful setting with Lake Superior cliffs above it. And just to get to go out there and, just to make that effort to go that far extra to get something that we really didn't have to do, but we did. It was just a tremendous day, and actually caught a couple fish trolling on the way back in, and, everything like that. I would say my only regret about that is we didn't have a sauna that day. And that is probably the overarching anecdote about the whole thing, is people say, oh, that must have been great. You got to go to all these incredible saunas and appreciate them. But for the most part, it was, it was like a production. I mean, we were trying to do 2 subjects in a day, and, and you got to do some setup to get the quality of photos that Aaron did, which were really, we're really trying to depict these buildings in the context that they're in, which is near a lake often. And, you don't want just this boxy picture of the building itself, but you want the whole context. And often that was also me inside there lighting it with a bunch of spruce boughs to just have that big puff of smoke coming out for the photo session.
Exactly.
And then your work was done as the stove is ticking away, and it's about 130 Fahrenheit, and now you're waving goodbye and going off to the next sauna.
Well, it wasn't even that, because it was just the spruce boughs burning out, and it never really got to heat. And
well, this is the dirty secret of making the book The Opposite of Cold. These very majestic scenes and the smoke coming up out of the chimney, and then off you go, right? Like you weren't able. It's like you were making ice cream, but you never really took a spoonful yourself.
Right. But there were some exceptions to that. And one notable one, and I think you've been there too, is the Finnish Sauna Society in Helsinki, which has just an amazing array. And we went out there, Aaron and I went out there, and he had just gotten off the plane, was totally jet lagged. He shot there as well. We did a shoot. They were very accommodating because it's a private club, and it's a sauna situation. So people are sitting around, of course, in their birthday suits or with towels. It was discreetly done. But anyway, after we got done, we got to enjoy that and take a splash in the Baltic there. And they were very accommodating, and kind of, this diplomatic practice of letting because to us, we're, even though he's Finnish American, and even though, I'm Scandinavian American and was working on this book, and we grew up with sauna, they figured that we really, we needed to, we would have some things to learn. And we certainly did. I mean, that was like studying at the it's like the trip to Mecca for
trip to Mecca, or like a bunch of friars, going out to study amongst the core. If you think sauna, go to the Finnish Sauna Society and something, and be humble.
And that an enormous sauna, smoke sauna hearth there, which is just an amazing thing to have that set up within this complex. It's kind of a single contained building by and large, where most of these saunas are. And for folks who don't know, a savu sauna, a smoke sauna, is the difference is you fire the hearth first before you have a sauna, and all of the smoke collects in the room and then exhausts out. And you generally have a lot of rocks, because then you want to heat up enough rocks that you have, several hours worth of bathing potential out of them afterwards. And it's definitely qualitatively, it's a whole new level. There's no doubt, if you ever have an opportunity to do it. So do you know of any, you're pretty much in touch with the community, anybody building sauna saunas out there that you know of?
No, but there's a couple asterisks to that, and stay tuned is the is the bottom line to that. A very appropriate question, but I'm going to throw it back at you. Did you see any? I know Savu sauna was touched upon in the book.
Yes.
Was there any or a bunch of functioning Savu saunas in your travel that you encountered?
So in the U.S., that was kind of like in our focus region. That was the holy grail to find a functioning Savu sauna. And I had asked around a bit, and someone would say, "Oh yeah, the Haryu brothers had one a couple of years ago, but it burned down." And then you're talking in another community, and "Oh yeah, there was somebody that did that back in the '70s, and it was great, and then it burned down." So they had their own peril. But we found a guy named John Sari. I'm pretty sure I'm remembering his name correctly, who teaches / taught at Northern Michigan University, and he has a sauna up in the UP in a beautiful part of the woods there near a river, not on a lake. And he had some Finnish relatives who came over and redid he had an existing sauna building and had a Savu sauna hearth built within it by these guys from up in north central Finland. And that was, so it was great to see that. And there's a great picture in the book of John lighting the Savu sauna hearth and the smoke, starting to infiltrate the room there.
Totally.
Yeah.
A very, we're talking centuries old. As you think about just the fundamentals of a Savu sauna or a smoke sauna, this was before the Iron Age and before there were chimneys and stuff. So it's a nod to the Michaela Allen and sweat and the universality of sweat or sweat bathing or sauna or whatever you call it. It's like the Native American sweat lodge in the sense that, as you mentioned, Mike, it's the heating of a mass amount of rocks. And in the case of Savu sauna, this open hearth, this fire chamber with a shit ton of rocks above it. And then they built, log structure above it to contain that level of heat, and then just push the smoke out, extinguish the fire. And now you're able to benefit, and a whole, extended family would bathe or sauna in these Savu saunas. And yeah, what's really cool is there's a post on Sauna Times, and I can link it here, is a gentleman who I met in a Savu sauna in my trip to Finland, wrote a book on how to build a Savu sauna. And there's a resurgence, I would say, of smoke saunas or Savu saunas in Finland from the purists. So it's really great to see that, but in North America, it's not, we can't find them is the bottom line. Hey, how are we doing? Go ahead.
Well, I have at least one more topic to spin off of there, and something we really haven't talked about, as we're both dedicated wood burners, but what kind of wood are you burning? And just let me lead into that. One of the things I learned about Savu saunas, and this was up in the UP, was that someone who had grown up with a Savu sauna on their farm, he said that the tradition was often to have several families over and use the same, because wood's it's a commodity. It takes a lot of time to gather it up and everything, obviously, and so and if multiple families can use the same heat on a given Saturday night, of course, do that. So, but he tipped me off that the final load of wood that you would burn in the Savu sauna, they would use popple, which does deliver quite a bit of heat, but it goes to ash really quickly. And so you wouldn't have these residual coals letting the gases off in there. And it would just be easy to get it out of the way at the end. It would give you that last flash, but you wouldn't have to worry about, like, I burn a lot of oak here. We have this heartwood oak that we get from local sawmills in the neighborhood, and it's incredible wood, but it's, really dense, and it's kind of, it poses its own challenges. Yeah. Anyway, what are you burning?
Well, I love the question. So up here at the you burn what you have, right? And you make it have work. Up here at and I found a blend up at our cabin to be so fantastic, where I would say 70-80% of my the wood that I burn in the sauna here is birch. And birch, that's so egalitarian to what's going. Is that right? I don't know if that's the right word, but it's so familiar because in Finland they're using predominantly birch in my experience. So that was very comforting to me. I mean, I was able to fire up sauna stoves and saunas in Finland because of how I know how birch burns. It's hot, it's clean, it's dry, it's really great. And so
Comes with its own kindling.
yeah, right, absolutely. And I only use birch bark to ignite my saunas. And then I could geek out with you about the upside down fire and what a game changer that's been, where I'll load my sauna up here at the cabin with 4 or 5 sticks of healthy dimensioned birch in the firebox, which is all the ash has been pushed down, and then a thing of birch bark on top, and then I just resurrected an old cedar dock, so I'll have some 2x6 cedar that I've used as kindling, and that's infallible for getting my sauna lit. What I do like to do in terms of the blend is mix the birch with, like, I call it maybe like a Yule log or a dense log. We have some maple up here, a hardwood, thrown in once in a while. So, up here at the cabin, 70-80% birch, and then 20% supplementing with a harder wood. In Minneapolis, I was able to find a birch tree that needed to come down, and I put a note in the mailbox, and they were more than happy to let me fell the tree. Four big stalks of a birch that is the same species that I burn up north. So that was really a treat to be able to get that and replicate in Minneapolis what I do up here at the cabin. So I'm burning through that now. But what I'm doing there down in the cities is about a 50-50 ash. Have you ever tried ash, Mike?
I've probably burned a little ash here at the farm, but just kind
Yeah.
of inconsequentially mixed in.
I think you'll find ash to be similar in terms of heat and burn rate to your oak. And that's been a real treat. This ash is unique because it doesn't require the curing time of other species like, maple, other hardwoods and stuff. You can burn ash green, and that's about the only wood that I've heard.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And by burning it, okay, so you get a good fire going, and you throw like a big ass piece of ash in there, and it's like, whoa, there's just so many BTUs that come off of that. When it, sometimes, and we talk about this at Lampa Manufacturing with the Kuman stuff when we're doing testing over there, we don't like to burn completely dry wood because there's a lot of energy lost in the wood when it's dried out completely. So yeah, there's some geekiness to be had about the curing rate. You don't want, how wood after like super dry wood becomes so much lighter. That's a loss of some energy that's had in the elements within the material. So anyway,
One thing we burn a lot down here that we're not getting from the sawmill is box elder, and that's very much what happens with box elder. It's it's a lighter hardwood, and it's related to the maples. But you find that if it's seasoned for a year and a half, it's like really lightweight, and suddenly it's kind of lost all of its mojo.
Right on, brother. And you talk about the rhythm of sauna and as it relates to the burning, and it's just it's so cool. I mean, I geek out on the operation of my sauna stoves and just becoming tuned to how to burn efficiently. I mean, you make a great point. I mean, I have a modern chainsaw, and I love the process of cutting and splitting and stacking. But even beyond all that, the counter to that is I abhor the waste of wood. I love the tuning and the efficiency of getting 4 to 5 really good rounds. And, I use this line, Mike, I don't know if you can relate to this one, but, you come out of the dock and it's maybe after round 3 or round 4. And then, you have when you're in a good place when the most important question in your head is, should I take another round? And so what I'll do is I'll let the coals decide. I'll open I'll look in the hot room and I'll look down, and, with a well-designed sauna stove, what happens is it burns from front to back. So what you're getting is you're getting the storage of coals like toward the back. And then when you pull your coals forward, more times than not, you're blessed with enough BTUs, and the stove starts tinkering again, and you got like another good round in it, and you without having to add that final stick of wood. So
yep, save it for next time.
Yeah. And then what's really cool about pulling the existing coals forward is that it burns out all of the ash. And so when you're ready for your next sauna, you really don't have to even clean out your firebox. I don't know. You find any of that action?
Yeah, the design of the stove I have, it's pretty much set up to really always be burning that up, and drops down to a grate. It's a Finnish stove, and kind of a smaller one in a smaller room, but it does a great job of that. There's usually, and with that oak, that usually not much ash left over.
Right on.
So I was just before, and this is a Saturday where we're recording this in a Saturday morning. So I was out for a quick walk to clear my mind before we talked, and I did get the sauna fire built over there. I got it about 3/4 built. I just have a little bit of kindling to put together to light it up this afternoon.
Ah, so wonderful. What's your sauna frequency?
Well, and I'll close with this, because it's like it was something I was thinking about earlier and would love to talk about it. And there's the Saturday night is obviously a pretty traditional time, but we are, and especially in these times with COVID, we're home a lot, and so it's maybe easy to stick to a schedule like that. But I'm also in tune to the weather, and so if it's like we have this, we're near a creek, so you can cold plunge in the creek, but actually it's certainly superior to use the rain barrel. And so if it's Saturday and it's forecast that you're going to get an inch of rain on Saturday night into Sunday morning, I might postpone it till Sunday afternoon, so you've got that fresh brimming tank full of rainwater over there.
I love that. Yeah.
But certainly every weekend, and certain times of the year, a midweek one as well. So yeah, but certainly on a one time a week level, and I think I would love to do two, but the economics of having a wood fired sauna is doesn't really lend to that. I'm just cheap enough and tired enough from wood splitting and wood hauling to respect that I got that 1 week thing. And I do find it's a real reboot, a real reset for me. If you're fatigued, anxious, worn out from a week, you've had some bad news, or you've had some bad health or something like that, it's just a really great way to do it in the evening, sort of. I love to do it before eating in the evening, to kind of prime your appetite, and then just get into it sets you up so well for sleeping well. I mean, and
so perfectly.
To be able to do that 1 day a week, I think is a good frequency for me.
And set up a good night's sleep. As you think about the sauna process, say you wake up and it's a sauna day. From that moment, from when you wake up to when you tuck yourself into bed at night, that full spectrum. What is your favorite moment? I mean, the lighting of waking up, the lighting of the stove, round one, the first splash of Lolu. As you cycle through something that is very familiar to both you and I, what is the moment that, if you had to bring it to an essence, what moment is most appreciative for you?
It's that equilibrium moment that we were talking about earlier, where and I'd say with a good cold plunge, you can achieve that every time. But anyway, that's where but it also takes a couple rounds to do that. And even, I know I'm going into the cold water every time, but it's still sort of a matter of kind of, harnessing your courage to do all that and to get into that cold water and submerge. And so I do one other method I have, in terms of the really hot blasts of steam and and submerging into the cold water, is do a 10 breath count. It just sort of makes you a little meditative and more aware of your, in the moment, but it also just keeps you focused on that. And And if you stay in that cold water, you don't just, jump in and come out. But if you're in there and just absorbing, you're absorbed in it for that amount of time and then come out. And then it's the moment that we're talking about here is you're sitting on the bench outside afterwards, contemplating going back in and going back into the cold plunge again. But you're just really, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. You are just completely present, and I think that's what I seek to achieve through that. And I'm fortunate enough to have that pretty regularly. The present moment, perfectly present moment.
Thank you. Thank you for that. As you think about sauna, for those maybe new to sauna, what is, in your eyes, in your view, what is most misunderstood about sauna?
That there's one way to do it, I would say, that's what really comes to mind, that there are rules, because and this is where I feel so fortunate to have one where, and like with my kids and my wife who, all use it as well, but to be able to use it at your own level of comfort and to kind of be the driver there, to use it totally on your own. It's a great place for solitude. It's a great place for conversation too and fellowship, but solitude as well. And not to, say, well, okay, so now we sat through this round. Dad says we got to sit here until we sweat. And then we're going to go outside and sit in the air for a while. And then we're going to come in, we're going to put one ladle on after 5 minutes. I mean, there shouldn't be any hard and fast rules there, except for a few rules of decorum, like close the damn door, right?
Right on, brother. If you could sauna with anybody in the world, dead or alive, past, present, who's the first person that comes to mind that you'd like to sit on the sauna bench with?
That's a great question. There are a lot of ways I could go with that. One person that comes to mind is Henry David Thoreau, because he was certainly a practitioner of, he loved small buildings and, authenticity and maybe quiet conversation. So maybe Henry David Thoreau, or maybe one of the mythic legends of the Kalevala.
Wow. Very good. And if you could bring a mobile sauna anywhere in the world, what's the first place that comes to mind for you?
Somewhere, it would have to be somewhere along Lake Superior, I think. I grew up on the shores of Lake Superior and have had surprisingly few sauna experiences in the lake itself. And this is totally improbable, and it wouldn't even probably be legal, but maybe at that spot at that beautiful little sand, you couldn't even get the trailer down there. So we're going to need a helicopter, first of all, and drop it into that little sand spit at the mouth of the Baptism River in Teteguch there. Has to be wood fired.
Well, this is why I love this question, is because anything is possible with sauna, Mike. And what we could do is we could get a floating sauna or a pontoon sauna and bring it there. I mean, that's
there you go.
Scope, man.
That's a great idea.
Let's make that intention.
That is great.
Let's do it.
And the advantage you have there is you've got that. It's the river's pretty substantial there, and you've got a nice little kind of pond behind the sandbar. And then you've often got a nice little surf kicking on the from Lake Superior on the lakeside as well.
And I know,
but you're going to have a lot of observers there. It's a pretty popular spot.
Well, you will have them sign a waiver.
Invite them in,
and they can come join, but they got to sign the waiver form, right? And go online to reserve at our new website. But there is something about that exact spot, and I've swam right there. What I love about that spot is, isn't it amazing the temperature differential from the water coming down from the street, especially in summer, compared to, you get in certain pockets and you feel like you're in bath water, and then you go like 3-4 feet away and then you get the true Lake Superior water, and it's like, holy hell.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So
those North Shore streams like that are all, they're all pretty small watersheds, and so in the summer that's it's a long time since that water came out of the ground.
Right.
Unlike here where I am on these little spring creeks in southwestern Wisconsin, we have a lot of great trout fishing down here, stream trout fishing and everything. And the water that I'm in, it just came out of the ground, a lot of it about 300, 400 yards upstream. So it's just out of the earth. It's really cold.
That is a beautiful thing. Yeah. Hey, Mike, this was so great. We spent a long time on Sauna Talk, and we weren't on the bench, but it's crazy in this time of Corona how with a Zoom call here, I feel like I'm with you, man. I mean, I feel like I've taken a few sauna rounds with you, and maybe we had a beer or hang out on your porch. And I just want to thank you for being a part of Sauna Talk, and for those listening, The Opposite of Cold, one of the real seminal pieces of work about what we all know is the authentic sauna experience. I love the book, and I got it right when it came out, and you've been so great for helping others down this journey of understanding. Any final word for listeners?
Well, I would just encourage anybody who's hung along this conversation this long, and I think we could go for another hour and a half, actually, but because it's fun to talk about this with someone who's as knowledgeable as you are, Glenn, and really appreciate your enthusiasm. But if you stuck around this long and are more interested or have any questions about things, I keep a Facebook page for the Opposite of Cold, the Northwoods Finnish sauna tradition. And so drop a line over there. And like I say, the book came out 10 years ago, but is still in print and available. Still sells upwards of a copy a day, which, this was a regional book from the start. This wasn't something on, although we got certainly some national attention with it early on and all that, but it still sells a copy a day 10 years later. That makes me feel great that it's, people find it to be a source. And I would say it's not a how-to book. It is a book. My primary goal was to capture the cultural aspects of it as a, regional phenomenon, but also really first and foremost was to get pictures of historic buildings and the details, so that if you're planning to do a sauna of your own, to be able to look at these details and see how the people that lived with this designed these rooms. And so there are a lot of interior shots too. And that was one of those things, is to get the authenticities on record before these buildings are gone. Because, even in the situation where I am at our place, the next family that comes in and buys a cabin after a Finnish family owned it for 30 years and another family for another 40 years, they might not feel any need for sauna. They might convert it to something else, or it might be in disrepair and they might just tear it down. So, these are buildings that are certainly worth preserving and firing up to their original purpose. But anyway, thanks again for the opportunity, Glenn. It's been a lot of fun to talk to you.
And you, Mike. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope to sauna with you, man, soon. In that sun right over your shoulder, and or anywhere for that matter.
Well, we got to do it in either Brimson or Vermilion, I think, is
right on.
Where it's going to happen.
You'd be most welcome. Thanks for being a part of Sauna Talk, Mike.